Hey everyone, this is the ThinkEnergy podcast, and I'm your host, Dan Séguin from Hydro Ottawa. Are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Well, the ThinkEnergy podcast isn't your ordinary energy show. Every 2 weeks, we take you on a tour and discuss, through a communication lens, some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations. So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is episode 12 of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Canada's energy sector employs, directly and indirectly, close to 900,000 people. Canada also uses a lot of energy, more than 5 times the world's average on a per capita basis. But some good news. Canada is the second largest hydropower producer in the world, trailing only China. Did you know that 51% of Canada's energy is used by industry for things like oil, gas, refining, mining, pulp and paper, and chemicals? Another 23% is used in transportation, freight trucks, passenger cars, and airplanes. That leaves only 14% for residential and 12% for commercial uses. Thanks to rapidly rising oil sand emissions, scheduled to hit 115 megatons by 2030, it's appearing unlikely that Canada will meet its Paris Agreement targets. Currently, we're overshooting the mark by a full 66 megatons, meaning costly emissions credits will have to be bought. So here's today's big question. What role does media play in helping to raise the level of understanding and awareness about the energy sector for us mere mortals? I'm proud to have one of these subject matter authorities join us today. Newly retired Shawn McCarthy was the global energy reporter for the Globe and Mail, working in the paper's Ottawa bureau for the Report on Business. Prior to taking on the energy beat for the Globe and Mail in 2006, Shawn served as the Globe's New York correspondent. Prior to taking on the energy beat for the Globe and Mail in 2006, Shawn served as the Globe's New York correspondent. Shawn, thank you for accepting my invitation today. I'm sure our listeners will truly enjoy this podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Dan.
Cool. I will lead with a few questions relating to the energy file. Then it's all about you. So I'd love to hear your views, and I'm sure you have some, on how the energy sector is understood and perceived by the public. Is it understood? If not, what's the role of media?
I think no industry is understood the way the participants in an industry would like it to be understood. I hear that all the time across the board from industry executives that, why aren't we better understood? So no, the energy industry is not understood. Partly it's even the use of the term energy industry is kind of all encompassing and says nothing. The oil and gas industry calls itself the energy industry. The power sector calls itself the energy industry, and they're two very different sectors. So it is not well understood, and I'll assume we're now talking power sector just to get specific. Man, the biggest learning curve I had when I started on the energy beat 13 years ago was figuring out who does what in the Ontario electricity sector and who's responsible for what decisions and how they get made. And then, of course, it all changed. So it's a labyrinth. It's very difficult. And communicating it to readers is a challenge in itself. But they get the basics. Yeah. People want 3 things from their electricity sector. They want reliability, they want affordability, and they want sustainability. And the stories that I have written, all tend to relate to those 3 themes. And so whether it's Ontario Power Generation rebuilding the Darlington nuclear station, or whether it's the battle that the Ontario government had with Hydro One when the new Conservative government came in and was taking on the affordability issue and really kind of targeting Hydro One and its executive, the $6 million man, I think they called him. All these go back to that issue. The report on business and writing for that publication, the business section of the Globe and Mail, is a little different than the broad audience. So I assume a certain level of business acumen, if not specializing in the sector. You can't assume very much other than that people have an interest in the business aspects of whatever it is I'm writing about. It's not a straight consumer kind of piece that you would get maybe in the Ottawa Citizen writing about Hydro Ottawa's prices going up or whatever.
Okay, we're talking about going up, so here's a good segue. Energy demands are on the rise, causing greenhouse gas emissions to increase. For energy producers, extreme weather is presenting challenges as they are facing the increasing number of severity of weather events. What are your thoughts on how the energy sector, or we can say utilities, are coping with the challenges of climate change?
So energy demand is going up in the world. It's not going up very fast in most of North America, if at all. Depends on your population increase, but the utilities in Ontario have done fairly well in terms of rolling out energy efficiency programs, which have helped keep a lid on demand, in fact. So that is something that I would say is a plus, although remains to be seen how they're going to be able to continue that with the new government, and some of it was funded. There've been changes as to how that gets funded. So I'd love to talk to your boss, in fact, as to what that means.
Noted.
In terms of maintaining these programs. So that's on the plus side. It's a challenge for the whole society to make this enormous transition from a reliance on coal, oil, natural gas that brought the world great prosperity at a cost. First, the cost was local pollution, and now we know it's much graver than that, and a change in climate that is going to have really horrible consequences if we don't put the brakes on it. And so, the utility sector is very much engaged. I would say that the executives in the utility sector are very much aware of the need for the transition, even as they are very much aware of the need for those other two imperatives that I mentioned, along with sustainability, which is reliability and affordability. And that balance is really tough to get at. I mean, we had an election not that long ago, a year ago, in which power prices in Ontario was a big issue. I don't think it was won't read too much into the loss of the Wing government, the Liberal government, which had been in power for a long, long time. I think that there were a lot of reasons for that other than electricity prices, but it was certainly a factor. But the current government is having a lot of trouble meeting its commitment to bring prices down for a lot of reasons. It's a hugely complicated set of circumstances for any executive to operate in. It's especially for a utility operator. Ontario, because of the decision many years ago to eliminate coal-fired power, we're in the advantageous position of having a very low-carbon electricity sector. And so, we rely somewhat on natural gas, but for the most part, it's nuclear and hydro and the renewables. So we are in an advantageous position that way. The question is, where do we take it? There's big demand for. The idea is that there's going to be more demand for electricity, not less.
No.
We want to electrify the transportation
Our cities
system and our cities, so that we are less reliant on natural gas and oil for heating and cooling and transportation. So huge challenges for the sector there, and it's an ongoing story.
Yeah, well, great segue actually we're talking right now at the local level, provincial level, but let's bring it more to the national level with the pending election.
Yeah.
What do you see as the hot button issues that Canadians are deeply interested in? And is the energy and the environment one of them?
Absolutely, it is.
What's overdone and dead?
What's overdone and dead? NAFTA, maybe.
Okay.
A big issue a year ago for the government. Deficits. The Conservatives would like to push the deficit issue. So I don't want to say it's dead, but I don't think it's going to be the be all and end all. The voters, for the most part, that care deeply about deficits are Conservative voters, and they're going to remain Conservative voters. Mm-hmm. So I think that issue, while it was an issue in 2015, remember Trudeau made a huge bet by endorsing deficit spending when the NDP was trying to look fiscally responsible, and it backfired on the NDP and worked for Trudeau. So that was a big issue then. I think it's less of an issue now. I do think that the climate change issue and the environment issue and the energy issue is huge in this election. Again, every election has a multiplicity of issues and personalities and credibility of leaders and immigration and so on, but obviously the carbon tax is going to be an issue out west and maybe across the country to some degree. Pipelines are an issue. So all sorts of energy and environment issues that'll cut in different ways depending on where you sit in the country.
Cool. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'd love to maybe switch it a bit. Let's focus on your trade, what you've been doing for the past number of years. Is it fair to say that reporters today are expected to, and I'll go through the list here, are expected to write the story, the headline, publish, market, and promote themselves across social channels and engage one-to-one or one-on-one, if you want, with the readers? If that's accurate, what skills make up today's new reporter? Because it has changed.
It certainly has changed. It's interesting. The basic job hasn't changed. If you're a reporter, the basic job is go out and talk to people, go through documents, come up with the reporting, write the story, and that hasn't changed a lot. I mean, obviously to some degree, the way we go about it has to some degree.
But speed to market has.
Speed to market certainly has. And yes, there are those other parts of the job. Depends where you work. I mean, the Globe and Mail, I wasn't editing my own story. I wasn't even writing my own headlines. I could count on having, a professional edit before it goes to print. I wasn't doing a lot of promotion, although, if I were sitting here, if I had not retired 2 weeks ago, I would be sitting here doing this as we agreed, a while back, as part of an effort to promote the Globe and Mail, and impress your readership with my brilliance and your listeners with it, so that they want to go and buy newspapers and read what we have to say. So there was, I always did take on a bit of a marketing thing. I thought that was an important part of my role, was not just what I wrote in the paper, but to the degree that I could be out there on other platforms, as we call it, talking up the value of the Globe and Mail and my role in it. Then, that was great if it helped the marketing. It was also I use Twitter a lot. I'm on Twitter a lot, and that is both a way to communicate to readers, outside the normal channel of the newspaper, but also a marketing thing. So they see my stories on Twitter, and you know what? It's you hit the paywall. So if you really want to read the story, you pay for a subscription. It always strikes me as odd that people complain about the paywall. Why can't we get your stories for free? And you hear it often on Twitter in particular, and it's like, well, who works for free? The internet age and has it happened to the music industry. It certainly happened to the newspaper industry, where people started expecting content for free, and that's a real problem. And there's a lot of competitors out there who still offer it for free, but the Globe and Mail does not.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the actual change. If we let's focus on the last, let's say 10 years. How has the actual newsroom, like I know through my lens, if we are to pitch to media, it's not the same as it was 10 years ago. So how has the newsroom changed?
It's smaller. It's a lot. Okay. It's a lot smaller. Yeah. And again, the Globe has held up fairly well, but it's a smaller newsroom than it used to be. Some of our competitors, the downsizing has been dramatic, and so you don't have. I'm sure you could tell me from 15 years ago, if you were in this job, who was the person at the Ottawa Citizen who followed Hydro Ottawa, and you could go to them for stories, and they knew their beat, and they knew what questions to ask, and they knew the file. And now you're going to get somebody who was in court yesterday covering something, and was down at the school board the day before covering something, and now there's a news release from Hydro Ottawa, and they're going to cover it. And they're smart and they're good journalists, but they don't have the background.
They don't have the depth.
Right, exactly. So that's a challenge. At the Globe, we still have enough people in places that we still have beats. So I left. They hired a young woman who's come in and is going to take on less the energy, but the climate and environment side of things, and she will, as she's already well briefed and knows the file, but as she does it for the next 2 years, she will be she's a bright young woman and will do very well. So, the one thing I've taught at Carleton the last couple of years, and one thing that has impressed me is the caliber of young journalists coming into the business. No worries there. The challenge is they have to do more with less all the time, and so that does a disservice. We never know what we're not getting. It's hard to know what you're not getting. I mean, some people read the local paper and think, boy, the coverage of City Hall isn't what it used to be. So you can weigh it against that. But the important stories, the ones that would have been dug out and would have possibly changed the course of what a city was doing or a corporation was doing, or shed the light.
Watchdogs.
The watchdog function is really eroded, and it's you don't know what you're missing when you don't get those stories out into the public.
No. Looking back at your career, what are you most proud of?
I think I established a reputation. I was always a reporter, not a columnist. There's a big difference in that I had to hold back my opinion and be more like a defense attorney, where, regardless as to what I think, I have to give the best defense to my client. So in this case, my client is the reader, and my job is to bring as much information to bear, the most important information to bear on a story at that particular time as it arises, with a fair representation from the various views on the story, ranging, say on a pipeline, from those who want to shut it down to those who want to plow ahead. So I think I had established a reputation for credibility and for fairness in my reporting and depth, that I knew what I was talking about. That's the beauty of having been in one beat for 13 years, and that I had done before to some degree as well. So it's a rare, as I mentioned earlier, it's a rare opportunity to spend that amount of time on one beat and really become a subject expert in the way that I was able to do. So I think that has been, as I look back on it, I'm proud of that. And secondly, bringing a sense of compassion to the beat. I mean, it's, energy and in the report on business, compassion doesn't sound like it has a place, but it's always important to remember the people that are at the center of the stories and not get too jaded and cynical about the process. And I think cynicism is a rot in our society. Skepticism, yes, but going into everything with an assumption that everybody is operating from bad motives and underhanded. I look for that, but I try not to expect it of everybody, and that's whether in my personal life or my business life. I just don't think that's a very healthy way to operate, and so I tried to bring that sense to my work, and bring a fair dose of skepticism and check what I was told, and not make assumptions, but not make assumptions the other way either.
Throughout the years, I'm sure you've traveled a lot.
Yes.
This question I like actually here is, if on a plane you were to select your next seatmate, who would it be? You've got 6 hours, you're off to Vancouver, you can pick their brains. Who would you like to have sitting beside you? Okay,
so you qualified this a little bit from the question you sent me originally, which was more wide open. And I was going to tell you, if I was just on a plane going anywhere, who would my seatmate be? It would be my wife, and we'd be going off on some sort of fabulous retirement trip. But since we're talking a business trip, and I had 6 hours to pick anybody, I would go with Barack Obama.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding? I mean, the president of the United States, first black man. Oh man, he was, he had his faults, and I actually didn't like the way he treated the media particularly. He was very tough in terms of using the law against whistleblowers.
Okay.
But I mean, he was a man who took on an economy that was plunging into the worst recession since the Great Depression. He pushed the climate change agenda and spoke very passionately about the climate change imperative and the risks that we all face. And he's a cool dude. So 6 hours on a plane with Barack Obama
with a cool dude
would be pretty awesome, I think.
Okay. Shawn, any advice for upcoming reporters? You were talking about you're actually in a great position to make that difference at Carleton U. Any advice for these reporters? Any advice for the traditional media companies? Are there keys? Like, you've been communicating with I'll say influencers, with business leaders through your different channels. What are some of the things, lessons learned? What are some of the things you could share with them to just make their lives a little easier, a little better?
Yeah, I think my basic advice would be sort of reflecting what I said about what I'm most proud of, I suppose, and it would be both to the reporters and the media company. There is a market out there, and for honest, hardworking journalism that is fair, that is factual, and that keeps the opinion on the sidelines of the journalists. I mean, there's a market for columnists too, but there's a market, I think, for basic reporting. The Globe and Mail, I would say, knows that and has not sought to cut its way to prosperity. There is a market for it, and for the journalists, There's always a temptation for the young journalist to want to inject their point of view into a story. And look, I'm not suggesting anybody's objective when we come to it. I'm not objective. I have my own views about climate change. I try to be fair. I can't be objective. So again, I think the analogy of the defense attorney is a good one. Park your personal opinions and prosecute the case as a journalist, as a reporter, and your readers will thank you for it. And your sources and contacts will thank you for it and be far more open to talk to you than if you are injecting yourself into the story and making judgments that may or may not hold up.
Great words of wisdom here. Okay, Shawn. Well, we've reached the end of another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. If people wanted to reach out, what is Shawn up to these days? Like you were talking about retirement, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic there. Talk to me about what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm calling it semi-retired. I just signed up with a strategy firm, Sussex Strategy, that does government relations and public policy sort of work on a very part-time basis. I will continue to write and freelance, and I will look after 2 grandkids one day a week with my wife. So that's a nice mix.
And if people wanted to reach out?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn, Shawn McCarthy 55 at gmail.com.
Perfect. Great. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan, for the opportunity.
Hey, folks. Thank you for joining us today. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode of ThinkEnergy. For past episodes, make sure you visit our website, hydroottawa.com/podcast. Lastly, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or maybe even tell a friend or a colleague. Anyway, this podcast is a wrap. Peace, everyone.